The silence in the dining room was a familiar beast. It was heavy and expensive, woven from the threads of unspoken expectations and upholstered with the finest damask. For 22 years, Evelyn had learned to live with it, to chew her food slowly and swallow her words even more carefully. Tonight, however, was different. A decision, warm and solid, had settled in her heart, and it was a decision that would shatter the pristine quiet for good. Her father, William, sat at the head of the long mahogany table, a king in his bespoke suit, surveying his small kingdom. His face, usually a mask of calm, patrician authority, was etched with a faint line of impatience. Across from Evelyn, her mother, Catherine, adjusted a pearl earring, her reflection shimmering in the polished silver. She was a woman sculpted from porcelain and propriety, her entire life a performance for an unseen audience. "Evelyn, dear," Catherine began, her voice as smooth as cream, "your father and I were just discussing the applications for your law school interviews. We think a new suit is in order. Something from Chanel, perhaps? First impressions are everything." William nodded, taking a delicate sip of his wine. "Exactly. The Lowell's son just secured a position at Sterling and Croft. A fine young man. It's all about maintaining a certain standard, Evelyn. Our family name opens doors, but you must be prepared to walk through them with dignity." This was the opening she had been waiting for, the gilded cage door swinging ajar. Evelyn placed her fork down, the soft clink against the china sounding like a gunshot in the stillness. "I'm not going to the interviews," she said, her voice steadier than she felt. Catherine's perfectly manicured hand froze midair. William's eyes, a cool and distant blue, narrowed slightly. "What did you say?" "I'm not going to law school," Evelyn repeated, this time with more force. She finally looked up from her plate, meeting their gazes directly. "I've deferred my acceptance. I'm going to work with wood. I want to be a carpenter, a furniture maker." The silence that followed was no longer just heavy, it was suffocating. Catherine let out a small, disbelieving laugh, a sound like cracking glass. "A carpenter? Evelyn, don't be absurd. Is this some sort of joke? A rebellion? It's in poor taste." "It's not a joke," Evelyn insisted, her hands clutching her napkin in her lap. "I've been taking classes for months. I love it. I love the smell of the sawdust, the feel of the grain, creating something real and beautiful with my hands. It feels honest." William placed his glass down with a definitive thud. The mask of calm authority crumbled, revealing a raw, cold anger beneath. "Honest? You want to talk about honesty? We have spent a fortune on your education, on tutors, on consultants, all to build a future for you, a respectable future. We have a reputation to uphold, a legacy, and you want to throw it all away to work with your hands like a common laborer." "There is no shame in labor, Dad," she pleaded, her voice rising. "It's what I'm passionate about. Can't you understand that? I don't want your legacy. I want my own life." "Your life?" Catherine's voice was sharp, laced with a venomous disappointment. "Your life has been a privilege, a gift we gave you. Do you have any idea how this will look? Our daughter, covered in dirt and sawdust. What will we tell our friends? What will we tell the board at the foundation? You would be an embarrassment. A walking, talking ruin of our reputation." The word hung in the air. Ruin. It was a wrecking ball aimed at the very foundation of her being. For them, it was all about appearances, a carefully curated image of success and prestige. Her own happiness was a secondary concern, a minor detail that could be sacrificed for the greater good of the family name. "If that's what you truly believe," Evelyn said, a profound sadness washing over her, "then I don't know what else to say." William stood up, his chair scraping harshly against the floor. He looked down at her, not as a father looks at a daughter, but as a CEO looks at a failed investment. "Then allow me to be perfectly clear. If you choose this path, you choose it alone. You will not do it under our roof or with our money. We will not support this degradation. You will be cut off, Evelyn. Completely." Catherine nodded in solemn agreement, her face a mask of cold resolve. "He's right. You are making a choice. You can have your ridiculous hobby, or you can have your family. You cannot have both." Evelyn looked from her father's rage to her mother's disappointment, and in that moment she saw the truth. They weren't offering a choice. They were delivering an ultimatum. And in their eyes, she was no longer a daughter. She was a liability. Standing up from the table, her legs trembling but her resolve firm, she made the only choice she could. She chose herself. Leaving her parents' house felt like stepping off a cliff into a fog. The first few weeks were a blur of cheap motels and overwhelming uncertainty. The trust fund she'd expected to access on her 25th birthday was locked away. A golden carrot dangled just out of reach, contingent on her good behavior. Her savings, accumulated from years of generous but controlled allowances, dwindled at an alarming rate. The world, once a gilded playground, had revealed its harsh, unforgiving edges. Evelyn found a small, dusty apartment above a laundromat, the constant hum of the machines a strange, rhythmic comfort. It was a world away from the silent, cavernous rooms of her childhood home. Her first major purchase wasn't a piece of art or a designer handbag, but a set of secondhand chisels and a sturdy workbench. She spent her days working a series of mind-numbing temp jobs, filing papers, answering phones, serving coffee, and her nights were for the wood. In the small, cramped space she designated as her workshop, surrounded by the fragrant scent of pine and oak, Evelyn found her sanctuary. Sawdust became her glitter. The ache in her muscles was a testament to her hard work, a feeling of accomplishment that no shopping spree had ever provided. She started small, crafting simple picture frames and small jewelry boxes, selling them at a local weekend market. Her hands, once soft and smooth, became calloused and strong, each scar a tiny map of a lesson learned. It was at the market that she met Arthur, a retired carpenter with a wild mane of white hair and eyes that crinkled at the corners when he smiled. He ran a stall across from hers, selling intricate birdhouses that were miniature architectural marvels. He watched her for weeks, his gaze observant but kind. One Saturday, he ambled over, holding one of her small, hand-carved boxes. "Good grain matching," he said, his voice a low, gravelly rumble. "You've got an eye for it, but your joinery is a bit clumsy. You're rushing the finish." Evelyn, accustomed to the veiled criticisms of her parents' world, braced for an insult. Instead, Arthur pointed to the corner of the box. "See here? You need to let the wood tell you what it wants to be. Don't force it, listen to it." It was the first piece of genuine, constructive advice she had ever received. That conversation was the beginning of a mentorship and a friendship. Arthur became the father figure she had unknowingly craved. He taught her the secrets of dovetail joints, the patience required for a perfect finish, and the quiet joy of a well-made thing. He never asked about her family or where she came from. He only saw who she was, a young woman with a fierce passion for wood. Years began to blend together, marked by the changing seasons and the growing complexity of her work. The small market stall grew into a registered business. Evelyn's craft. She started taking custom commissions, a bookshelf for a local teacher, a cradle for a young couple, a dining table for a family's new home. Each piece was not just an object, but a part of someone's life, imbued with purpose and care. She bought a small plot of land on the outskirts of town, with a loan she secured not with a family name, but with a meticulously detailed business plan and a portfolio of her work. On that land, she designed and built her own small house, a testament to her skills. It was modest but beautiful, with exposed wooden beams and large windows that flooded the space with light. Behind the main house, she built a larger, fully equipped workshop, and attached to it a small, charming guest house. The idea was to one day rent it out for extra income, or perhaps host woodworking workshops. News of her success traveled, as news often does in the small, interconnected circles of the wealthy. She heard whispers through the grapevine, old family friends who would see her at the bank or the grocery store and offer a hesitant, surprised smile. They reported back to William and Catherine, painting a picture not of a destitute daughter, but of a self-made woman. She never reached out to her parents. The wound they had inflicted was deep, a clean cut she had learned to live with. She had built a new life, a new family of friends and loyal clients. She was happy, truly and deeply happy, in a way she never could have been in their world of silent, suffocating expectations. The call came on a Tuesday. Evelyn was in her workshop, the late afternoon sun slanting through the high windows, illuminating the swirling motes of sawdust like golden dust. She was applying the final coat of oil to a large, handcrafted dining table, its surface glowing with the deep, rich warmth of cherry wood. The commission was for a family who had saved for 2 years to have one of her pieces in their home. The thought filled her with a quiet, profound sense of purpose. Her phone buzzed against the workbench, an unfamiliar number flashing on the screen. She wiped her hands on her apron, a faint sense of annoyance pricking at her. She rarely answered calls she didn't recognize, but something made her swipe to answer. "Hello?" A hesitant, reedy voice on the other end. "Evelyn? Is that really you?" The voice was thinner, stripped of its usual silken authority, but it was unmistakable. Evelyn's hand tightened on the phone, her knuckles turning white. It was her mother. After nearly a decade of silence, the sound of Catherine's voice was a ghost rattling chains in a long-abandoned room. "What do you want?" Evelyn's tone was flat, colder than she intended. There was a shaky breath on the other end. Evelyn, darling, your father and I need to see you. It's important. After 9 years, suddenly it's important? The bitterness in her own voice surprised her. She thought she had sanded down those rough edges long ago. Please, Catherine's voice cracked, and for the first time, Evelyn heard a note of genuine desperation. It was a sound she never thought her mother capable of making. Things have changed. It's about the article, I'm sure you've seen it. Evelyn hadn't. She didn't follow the financial news or the society pages anymore. That was a language from a country she no longer lived in. After the call, a morbid curiosity led her to the internet. And there it was, in stark black and white. The headline read, William Lowell's empire crumbles amidst fraud allegations. The story detailed a catastrophic collapse. Her father, the man who preached about standards and reputation, had been involved in a high-risk, fraudulent investment scheme. He had leveraged the family's entire fortune, and the fortunes of many of their friends on a house of cards. When it fell, it took everything with it. The sprawling mansion, the fleet of luxury cars, the priceless art, the charitable foundation that bore their name, all seized or sold to cover a mountain of debt and legal fees. They were, in a word she knew all too well, ruined. The article painted a picture of a man disgraced, a reputation not just tarnished, but obliterated. It mentioned her mother, Catherine, the society queen, now a pariah. And then, a small throwaway line at the end of the article caught Evelyn's eye. The Lowells also have a daughter, Evelyn, from whom they are reportedly estranged. Estranged. It was a sterile, clinical word for a wound that had bled for years. A strange mix of emotions churned within her. There was a grim, vindicating satisfaction, a voice that whispered, "Now you know how it feels." But beneath it, there was no joy. There was only a hollow ache. The empire she had been cast out of no longer existed. The reputation she had supposedly threatened was now a smoldering ruin, and she had had nothing to do with its destruction. They had done it to themselves. She thought of her father's cold, angry face, his decree that she would be cut off completely. She thought of her mother's sharp, disappointed words, calling her a ruin and an embarrassment. They had built their world on the unsteady pillars of pride and public perception, and now that world was gone. All they had left was the one thing they had so easily discarded, their daughter. The irony was as heavy and unyielding as granite. Her phone buzzed again. This time it was a text from her mother. "We have nowhere else to go. Can we please just talk?" Evelyn stared at the message, her thumb hovering over the screen. The cherry wood table stood before her, solid and real, a testament to the life she had built with her own 2 hands. A life of honesty and hard work. Now the ghosts of her past were knocking at the door, asking for shelter. Evelyn agreed to meet them at a small, unassuming cafe in the center of town. It was her territory, a place of simple wooden tables and the comforting aroma of roasted coffee beans. She chose it deliberately, avoiding any semblance of the fine dining establishments that had served as the backdrop for her youth. She arrived first, choosing a small table in the corner, her back to the wall. It was a habit she'd developed over the years. Always know your exits. Always be aware of your surroundings. When they walked in, she almost didn't recognize them. The William and Catherine who entered the cafe were pale imitations of the parents she remembered. Her father, who had always stood so tall, a titan of finance, was stooped. His expensive suit, probably one of the last he owned, hung loosely on his diminished frame. His hair was thinner, and the confident, commanding aura he once projected had been replaced by a weary, haunted look. He avoided her gaze, his eyes darting around the simple cafe as if he was ashamed to be seen in such a place. Her mother was even more changed. The porcelain perfection was gone, shattered. Her makeup was applied with a less steady hand. Her designer clothes looked tired, and there was a frantic, nervous energy about her that Evelyn had never seen before. The effortless grace had been replaced by a brittle anxiety. They looked like ghosts, haunting the edges of a life that no longer belonged to them. They approached her table, and an awkward silence fell as they sat down. A waitress came to take their order, and the simple act seemed to fluster Catherine. "Just a tea, please," she mumbled, while William simply shook his head, saying nothing. Evelyn ordered a black coffee, the familiar ritual a small anchor in the turbulent sea of the moment. "You look well, Evelyn," Catherine began, her attempt at a warm smile looking more like a pained grimace. "I am well," Evelyn replied, her voice even. She refused to fill the awkward silence for them. This meeting was on their terms, for their reasons. She would wait. "This town is quaint," Catherine added, looking out the window with a feigned interest. "So different from the city. It is, Evelyn agreed. The small talk died, withering in the vast unspoken space between them. Finally, William cleared his throat, the sound rough and loud in the quiet cafe. He still wouldn't look at her, focusing instead on the patterns in the wooden table. A table, Evelyn noted with a detached sense of irony, that was poorly made, with a warped top and uneven legs. Your mother told you about the situation, he said, his voice low and gravelly. It wasn't a question. I read the article, Evelyn confirmed. Catherine's eyes filled with tears, a sight so shocking that Evelyn felt a momentary pang of something she couldn't name. Pity? Surprise? It's all gone, Evelyn. Everything. The house, the money, our friends. They don't answer our calls anymore. We have been utterly abandoned. Abandoned. The word hung in the air, a bitter echo of the ultimatum they had given her 9 years ago. We have nothing, Catherine continued, her voice trembling. We've been staying with your Aunt Helen, but that's temporary. She's making it very clear we're a burden. She reached across the table, her hand hovering for a moment before she seemed to think better of it and drew it back. Evelyn, we saw... Someone mentioned you'd built a house, that you have a small guest house on the property. Here it was, the real reason for the call. The purpose of this stilted, painful reunion. Evelyn felt her entire body tense. She remained silent, her gaze steady. We were thinking, Catherine said, her voice dropping to a conspiratorial whisper, that perhaps, just for a little while, we could stay there, just until we get back on our feet. A place to live where we aren't under someone's charity. We wouldn't be any trouble, I promise. It would just be a temporary arrangement. William finally looked up, his eyes meeting Evelyn's for the first time. The cold anger and pride were gone. In their place was the hollowed-out shame of a fallen man. He looked utterly defeated. We have nowhere else to go, he whispered, the words seeming to cost him what little pride he had left. The audacity of the request was breathtaking. It was a punch to the gut. They had cast her out, disowned her for choosing a path that they deemed an embarrassment, a degradation. They had told her she would ruin their reputation. Now, with their reputation in ashes, they were asking to move into the home that her ruinous career had built. They weren't asking for her forgiveness. They weren't apologizing for the years of pain and silence. They were asking for a roof over their heads, a convenient solution to their self-inflicted problem. Evelyn looked from her father's broken expression to her mother's desperate, pleading eyes. The cafe around them seemed to fade away. There was only the weight of their request, the echo of their past cruelty, and the solid, unshakable reality of the life she had forged not in spite of them, but without them. Her answer sat on her tongue, a word that held the power to either save them or condemn them to the very fate they had once wished upon her. Evelyn held their desperate gazes, the clatter of the cafe around them fading into a dull hum. The silence stretched, thick with the weight of 9 years of unspoken words, of anger and of pain. In her mind, she saw their faces as they had been that night at the dining table, cold, imperious, and absolute in their judgment. They had pronounced her a ruin. They had severed her from their lives with the clean, sharp edge of their pride. And now, stripped of that pride, they were asking to take shelter in the very world they had condemned. A bitter, triumphant no rose in her throat. It would be so easy to say. It would be justice. She could turn her back on them, just as they had turned their back on her. She could leave them to the mercy of a world that had no pity for the fallen. But as she looked at the two broken people before her, she saw something beyond the ghosts of her past. She saw the hollowed-out eyes of her father, a man who had lost his entire identity. She saw the trembling hands of her mother, a woman who had built her life on a foundation of sand. They were not the titans who had exiled her. They were simply two lost, aging people with nowhere to go. And what would that no truly accomplish? It would feed her anger for a moment, but it would leave a bitter aftertaste. It would make her like them. In that moment, Evelyn understood that her strength wasn't just in the life she had built, but in the person she had become, a person who did not need to be defined by their cruelty. Yes, she said. The word was quiet, but it landed with the force of a gavel. Catherine let out a sob, a raw, ragged sound of disbelief and relief. William's head snapped up, his eyes wide with shock. He had expected rejection. He had braced for it. He did not know how to process this. You can stay in the guest house, Evelyn continued, her voice gaining strength, laying down the terms not as a daughter, but as a landlord. It is furnished and has its own kitchen. You will not want for comfort. But there are conditions. She leaned forward, her gaze firm, unwavering. This is my property, my home, My business is here. You will be guests. You will respect my life, my work, and my privacy. There will be no unsolicited advice, no commentary on my choices, and no attempts to rekindle a family dynamic that no longer exists. You are not moving back into my life. You are moving into a building on my land. Do you understand? They both nodded numbly, too stunned to argue. The power dynamic had been irrevocably inverted. She was the one with the authority now. She was the one setting the terms. The following days were a surreal ballet of logistics. Evelyn watched from her workshop window as a small, battered car pulled up, carrying all of their worldly possessions in a few suitcases and cardboard boxes. William, moving stiffly, carried a box that seemed too heavy for him. Catherine directed him with a fraction of her old command, but her voice was thin, lost in the open air. The guest house was beautiful. Evelyn had built it with the same care and attention to detail as her finest commissions. It had warm, polished floorboards, a comfortable bed, and a small, perfectly functional kitchen. To them, after years in a palatial mansion, it must have felt like a shoebox. Evelyn left them a bag of groceries on the counter and then retreated to her own house, leaving them to settle into their new, diminished reality. For the first few weeks, they were like ghosts haunting the edge of her property. They rarely left the guest house. But slowly, tentatively, life began to seep back into them. Catherine started a small garden in a patch of dirt behind the guest house. William would sit on the porch for hours, just watching. His gaze was often fixed on the open doors of Evelyn's workshop. He watched as she transformed raw slabs of wood into things of beauty and function. He watched the quiet confidence in her movements, the skill in her calloused hands. He watched her clients arrive, smiling and eager, and leave with pieces that they would cherish for a lifetime. He was watching his daughter, the ruin, thrive in the life she had built from nothing. One afternoon, he walked over to the workshop. He didn't enter, but stood at the threshold, his hands tucked into his pockets. Evelyn, sensing his presence, looked up from her work. "That table," he said, his voice raspy. He pointed to the cherry dining table she was now polishing. "The joinery is perfect. I've never seen anything like it." It wasn't an apology, not in words, but it was an admission. It was an acknowledgement of her skill, her passion, her world. It was the validation he had denied her for so long. Evelyn simply nodded. "Thank you." The true breakthrough came a week later. Catherine knocked on her door, holding a freshly baked loaf of bread. Her eyes were red-rimmed. "We were wrong, Evelyn," she said, her voice barely a whisper. "All those years we were so obsessed with our reputation, with what people would think. We thought you were ruining it, but the truth is, we ruined ourselves. We ruined everything that mattered. We failed you, not as a Lowell, but as our daughter. And I am so, so sorry." Tears streamed down her face, real tears of regret, not of self-pity. In that moment, Evelyn felt the final, hardened knot of resentment in her chest begin to loosen. Forgiveness was not a switch to be flipped, but perhaps it was a door that could be slowly opened. She took the bread from her mother's trembling hands. "I know," she said softly. The relationship with her parents would never be what it once was, nor what it could have been. The scars were too deep. But in the quiet space of her own making, surrounded by the scent of sawdust and the evidence of her own strength, a new, more honest foundation was being laid. It wasn't a perfect ending, but it was a real one, built not on obligation or reputation, but on the quiet, resilient power of grace.